I'm David Matthews, 47, and for 5 years my wife's family treated me like I was invisible, or worse, like I was actively ruining their daughter's life. Every holiday gathering, every family dinner, every celebration became a masterclass in polite rejection. They'd smile at Sarah, laugh with the kids, and look right through me as if I didn't exist. The whispers weren't even subtle anymore. He's holding her back. She could do so much better. What does she see in him? I'd built my software company from nothing, working 16-hour days in our garage while Sarah pursued her teaching career. But to them, I was just the guy who wasn't good enough for their golden daughter. Then came Christmas dinner 2023, the doorbell rang during dessert, and everything changed. The Forbes journalist standing at our door wasn't there for Sarah's father, the respected banker. She was there for me. Looking back, I should have seen the signs from the very beginning. The wedding photo sitting on Sarah's parents' mantelpiece tells the whole story if you know how to read it. There I am, standing slightly apart from the family group, my smile, genuine but somehow isolated. Sarah's father, Richard, has his arm around his daughter but his body angled away from me. Her mother, Patricia, is looking at the camera with that practiced smile that never quite reaches her eyes when I'm around. The rejection didn't start overnight. It began with small things during our engagement, the way conversations would pause when I entered a room, how my opinions were politely acknowledged but never truly considered. Richard would ask about my little computer project with the kind of condescending tone reserved for a child's hobby. Patricia would inquire about my family background with surgical precision, each question designed to reveal exactly how different our worlds were. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, bless her heart. She'd deflect her father's subtle digs about my unconventional career path, or redirect her mother's pointed questions about when I planned to get a real job. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she'd grip my hand a little tighter. When her family gathered, the wedding itself was a masterclass in polite exclusion. They'd invited their entire social circle, bankers, lawyers, doctors, country club members, all successful professionals who looked at me like I was some kind of curiosity. My side of the church was noticeably smaller, filled with my work, family and college friends who seemed intimidated by the grandeur of it all. During the reception, I watched as Richard made his father-of-bride speech, praising Sarah's accomplishments and expressing his hopes for her future. When he mentioned me, it was with the kind of diplomatic language you'd use to describe an unfortunate but unchangeable circumstance. "We welcome David into our family," he said, "and we're sure he'll find his way to success." Find his way to success? As if I was some lost soul wandering in the wilderness of mediocrity. The honeymoon period literally and figuratively was brief. Within months of our marriage, the family dynamics crystallized into their permanent form. I was tolerated, not accepted, included in body but not in spirit. The man who'd somehow managed to win their daughter's heart, despite being fundamentally unsuitable for their world. I told myself it didn't matter. Sarah loved me, and that was enough. But the constant undercurrent of disapproval began to wear on both of us. Every family gathering became a test. I was destined to fail. Every interaction a reminder that I would never measure up to their standards. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I was already building something extraordinary in our garage, something that would change not just my life, but the entire landscape of how people thought about data security. But that revelation was still years away, and the rejection I felt that night would only deepen with time. The garage became my sanctuary. While Sarah taught her third-grade class each day, I'd disappear into that cluttered space filled with servers, monitors, and the constant hum of cooling fans. The concrete floor was cold under my feet, and the fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, but it was mine. Here, surrounded by lines of code and circuit boards, I could build something meaningful without judgment. I'd started the company, Tech Shield Solutions, with $15,000 from our wedding fund and a credit card. That made Sarah nervous. The idea had come to me during a particularly frustrating day at my corporate IT job, watching yet another security breach destroy a client's reputation. There had to be a better way to protect sensitive data, something more intuitive and foolproof than the clunky systems dominating the market. My background wasn't impressive by Silicon Valley standards. I'd grown up in a blue-collar family in Ohio, the son of a factory worker and a school secretary. My parents had scraped together enough money to send me to a state university, where I'd studied computer science more out of necessity than passion. I was good with computers, they were hiring in tech, and I needed a job. Simple as that. But somewhere along the way, necessity had transformed into genuine fascination. I began to see patterns in code that others missed. Security vulnerabilities that seemed obvious once you knew where to look. My corporate job paid the bills, but it never challenged me. I'd finish my assignments in half the time allotted, then spend the rest of my day dreaming about solutions to problems my bosses didn't even know existed. Sarah supported the garage venture, even when it meant eating ramen for dinner more nights than either of us cared to count. She'd bring me coffee around 10 each evening, perching on a folding chair while I explained my latest breakthrough or obstacle. She didn't understand the technical details, but she understood the fire in my eyes when I talked about the work. "You're different when you're out here," she'd say, watching me debug a particularly stubborn piece of code. "More alive somehow." she was right. In the garage, I wasn't the unsuitable son-in-law who'd never measure up. I was a creator, a problem solver, someone building something that mattered. The work demanded 16-hour days, weekends, and every spare moment, but it never felt like sacrifice. It felt like purpose. The first breakthrough came after 8 months of grinding work. I'd developed a predictive algorithm that could identify potential security threats before they materialized, essentially creating a digital immune system for corporate networks. The beta testing results were remarkably at 89% reduction in successful attacks across all test environments. That night, Sarah found me staring at the test results on my monitor, tears streaming down my face. "It works," I whispered. "It actually works." She wrapped her arms around me from behind, and for a moment, the cramped garage felt like the center of the universe. Neither of us spoke about her family's continued skepticism, but we both knew this was bigger than their expectations or my own insecurities. I was building an empire in the shadows, one line of code at a time, and someday, maybe sooner than anyone expected, the world would notice. The Richmond family portrait dominated the formal dining room like a monument to success. Richard and Patricia stood at the center, flanked by their 3 children, all accomplished, all confident, all everything I would never be. Every time I sat at that polished mahogany table, I felt the weight of their collective achievement bearing down on me. Richard Richmond III had built his banking career on old money connections and new money ambition. At 62, he commanded respect in financial circles throughout the state, serving on multiple boards, and wielding influence that extended far beyond his corner office. His handshake was firm, his voice carried authority, and his expectations were impossibly high. He'd grown up understanding that success was not just expected but inevitable, a family tradition passed down through generations of Richmond men. Patricia was his perfect complement, elegant, well-educated, and socially connected in ways that opened doors before they even needed to be knocked upon. She'd graduated from Wellesley with a degree in art history but had never worked a day in her life, dedicating herself instead to charity work and maintaining the family's social standing. Her smile was weapon and shield combined, capable of making you feel welcomed or utterly dismissed with the slightest adjustment in warmth. Sarah's older brother, Michael, had followed his father into banking, rising quickly through the ranks at a rival firm. At 35, he was already a senior vice president with a corner office and a salary that dwarfed anything I'd ever earned. His wife Jennifer came from similar stock private school, educated, impeccably dressed, and completely fluent in the language of status and success. They lived in a colonial mansion with a circular driveway and seemed to produce beautiful, accomplished children as effortlessly as they acquired luxury cars. Then there was Sarah's younger sister, Amanda, the family's golden child. At 28, she was already a partner at a prestigious law firm, specializing in corporate mergers that made headlines in the financial press. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, spent 2 years clerking for a federal judge, and was rumored to be considering a run for district attorney. Amanda possessed the kind of razor-sharp intelligence that made you feel slightly stupid just by being in the same room. And finally, there was Sarah, sweet, dedicated Sarah, who'd chosen teaching over law school and loved her students with a passion that never translated into the kind of worldly success her family understood. She was the rebel, the one who disappointed them by choosing heart over ambition, purpose over profit. In their eyes, marrying me was simply the latest in a series of puzzling decisions that proved she lacked the killer instinct that defined the Richmond legacy. Every family gathering was a performance, a carefully orchestrated display of achievement and expectation. Michael would regale us with stories of his latest deals, Amanda would casually mention her appearances on legal news programs, and Richard would hold court about market trends and political connections. Patricia would orchestrate the conversation like a skilled conductor, ensuring everyone had their moment to shine. Everyone except me. I'd sit quietly, nodding at appropriate moments, asking questions that demonstrated interest without revealing ignorance. When pressed about my own work, I'd mention my corporate IT position in terms so generic they lost interest within seconds. My garage project remained my secret, partly out of caution but mostly out of pride. I couldn't bear the thought of their polite dismissal of something so precious to me. The family's success wasn't just professional, it was cultural, social, and deeply ingrained. They spoke the language of privilege fluently, moving through their world with the confidence of people who'd never doubted their place in it. Country club memberships, charity galas, European vacations, and connections that turned phone calls into opportunities. This was their normal, their baseline expectation of how life should unfold. Looking at that family portrait during countless dinners, I understood why they saw me as an anomaly. I represented everything they'd worked to rise above middle-class origins, uncertain prospects, and the kind of scrappy determination that belonged in their past, not their present. In their world, success was inherited and refined, not built from scratch in a suburban garage. But what they didn't understand was that I was building something they'd never seen before, something that would make their traditional measures of success look quaint and limited. The portrait on their wall captured a moment in time, But time was about to change everything. The gift exchange at Christmas 2019 perfectly encapsulated my place in the Richmond family hierarchy. I watched from the corner of the living room as Patricia handed out presents with the precision of a ceremonial ritual, each gift carefully selected to communicate love, respect, and expectations. Michael received a vintage Rolex from his father's collection, time for the next generation to carry on the tradition. Amanda got a first edition signed copy of a Supreme Court justice's memoir, along with a promise of an introduction. Sarah's gift was a beautiful pearl necklace that had belonged to Patricia's grandmother, passed down through generations of Richmond women. Then came my turn. Patricia approached with a small, hastily wrapped package, and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. Inside was a generic tie from a department store, still bearing the price tag, $24.99. The same tie, I later realized, that Richard had worn to a casual lunch meeting weeks earlier. "I thought you could use something for work," Patricia said, her voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm. "Professional appearance is so important." The message was clear. I needed improvement, and even their smallest effort was more than I deserved. Sarah's face flushed red, but she said nothing. Michael smirked into his champagne glass. Amanda examined her fingernails with sudden fascination. Richard cleared his throat and suggested we move to dinner, as if the entire exchange had been perfectly normal. But it wasn't normal. It was calculated. Humiliation disguised as generosity, and it happened every single holiday. Easter brought similar dynamics. I'd arrive with Sarah, carrying a beautiful orchid arrangement I'd researched and carefully selected, only to watch Patricia place it on a side table while prominently displaying Amanda's expensive wine and Michael's gourmet cheese selection. During dinner, conversations would flow around me like water around a stone. Banking regulations, legal precedents, social events I wasn't invited to, people I'd never meet. Thanksgiving was perhaps the worst. The tradition required each family member to share what they were grateful for, and I'd watch as they went around the table expressing gratitude for career achievements, family milestones, and future opportunities. When my turn came, I'd mumble something about Sarah and health, basic things that seemed pathetic compared to their grand pronouncements. David's being modest. Sarah would sometimes interject, trying to rescue me from my own mediocrity. "He's been working on some really innovative projects." "Oh," Richard would respond with the kind of polite interest you'd show a child describing their crayon drawing. "What kind of projects?" And I'd deflect, making vague references to system improvements and efficiency protocols because I couldn't bear to see their expressions when they realized I was still just the IT guy tinkering with computers. The garage project remained my secret, growing more significant with each passing month while I remained silent about its potential. The worst part wasn't the gift disparity or the conversational exclusion, it was the way they'd talk about me. When they thought I couldn't hear, holiday gatherings meant extended stays, and the Richmond house carried sound in unexpected ways. I'd overhear Patricia on the phone with friends, explaining Sarah's husband with the kind of charitable tone reserved for discussing family embarrassments. "He's a sweet man," she'd say, "but not exactly what we'd envisioned for Sarah. She's so brilliant, so capable. We just hope she doesn't limit herself." Richard was more direct in his assessments. During one particularly painful conversation I overheard from the kitchen, he told Michael, "I give it 5 years before she realizes she's settling. Sarah's got too much potential to waste on someone who lacks ambition." 5 years, as if our marriage was a business venture, he was quietly shorting. The children, Michael and Jennifer's kids, absorbed these attitudes like sponges. They'd politely answer my questions but never seek out my attention, never ask to hear a story or play a game. I was uncle adjacent, present but not particularly relevant to their world. Sarah tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could see the toll it took on her. She'd grow tense as holidays approached, snapping at me over minor things that would normally slide past without comment. After each gathering, she'd apologize profusely, making excuses for her family's behavior that we both knew were inadequate. "They just need time to warm up to you," she'd say. Though 5 years had passed, without any noticeable warming. "Maybe they don't like change," she'd suggest. Though they'd embraced Jennifer immediately when Michael brought her home. "They're worried about my happiness," she'd explain, which was probably the closest to truth, but didn't make it hurt any. The gift exchange list I'd started keeping became a documentation of diminishing returns. Each year, my presents became more generic, more obviously last minute, more clearly purchased out of obligation rather than thought. Meanwhile, the family's gifts to each other grew more personal, more expensive, more laden with meaning, and tradition. By Christmas 2021, I'd stopped expecting anything different. The garage project was thriving, my company was growing, and I'd begun to understand that their approval wasn't necessary for my success. But it still stung, still made me feel like the outsider who'd somehow tricked their daughter into loving him. What they didn't know was that I was no longer the struggling IT worker they'd dismissed. I was building something revolutionary, something that would change entire industries. And someday soon, they'd discover that the man they'd written off as unremarkable was actually extraordinary. I started keeping notes in a small leather journal. documenting the conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. It began as a way to validate my own sanity. Surely I wasn't imagining the coordinated effort to undermine my marriage, but the evidence accumulated quickly, and the pattern became impossible to deny. The phone calls were the worst. Patricia would ring Sarah every Tuesday evening, ostensibly to check in on her week, but the conversations inevitably steered toward my shortcomings. I'd be in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when Sarah would answer, her voice bright and welcoming, initially, then gradually growing strained. "How are things with David's work situation?" Patricia would ask, the word situation dripping with concern. "Is he still doing that computer thing?" "Mom, he's an IT professional," Sarah would reply. But I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. "Of course, dear, I just worry about your future together. Financial security is so important for a marriage. Look at Michael and Jennifer. They've never had to worry about money." One evening, I pressed my ear against the kitchen door and heard Patricia's voice clearly through Sarah's phone speaker. "Amanda met the most wonderful young man at the law firm's charity gala. Partner track, Harvard MBA, comes from a lovely family. He's still single. You know." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm married." "I know that, sweetheart. I'm just saying it's never too late to reconsider your options. You're still young, still beautiful. You could have any life you wanted." Richard's approach was more subtle but equally devastating. He'd invite Sarah to lunch without me, father-daughter bonding sessions that always seemed to leave her troubled and distant. She'd return from these meetings with a crease between her eyebrows and an inability to meet my eyes directly. "What did you talk about?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just family stuff, the usual." But it wasn't the usual. I could tell by the way she'd move around the house afterward, straightening things that were already straight, organizing closets that were already organized, nervous energy that needed an outlet because she couldn't express what was really bothering her. Michael's contribution to the campaign was professional jealousy disguised as brotherly concern. He'd casually mention his latest bonus, his promotion timeline, his investment portfolio, always with the addendum that Sarah deserved someone who could provide similarly. "You know, I just want you to be happy," he'd say, "and financially secure." Amanda was perhaps the most effective because her approach felt supportive. She'd take Sarah shopping and listen sympathetically to marriage complaints that all couples have, then amplify them into relationship red flags. A disagreement about household chores became evidence of incompatibility. My occasional bad mood after difficult workdays was reframed as concerning personality traits. "You're such a giver, Sarah," Amanda would say. "You deserve someone who lifts you up, not someone you have to constantly encourage." The family had learned to weaponize Sarah's compassion against our marriage. They knew she'd never leave someone who needed her, so they worked to convince her that she was the one who needed rescuing. I began to notice changes in Sarah's behavior that correlated directly with family contact. After Patricia's Tuesday calls, she'd be distant and contemplative. Following lunches with Richard, she'd ask probing questions about my career plans and financial goals. Amanda's influence showed up as sudden interest in couples therapy or marriage. Enrichment books? The campaign wasn't coordinated in any official sense. There were no family meetings where they strategized my removal, but it didn't need to be. Coordinated, they all shared the same goal and understood their individual roles in achieving it. Patricia provided emotional pressure, Richard offered financial concerns, Michael demonstrated alternative success models, and Amanda supplied the psychological framework for justified dissatisfaction. The worst part was watching Sarah slowly internalize their doubts. She began to see our life through their eyes: the modest house, the second-hand furniture, the careful budgeting that had become necessary while I invested everything into the garage project. What had once felt like partnership began to feel like settling. "Do you ever think about what life would be like if you'd taken that corporate promotion?" she asked one evening, seemingly out of nowhere. "Which promotion? The management position in Chicago? The one you turned down when we got married?" I'd turned it down because it would have meant relocating away from her family. And despite their treatment of me, I'd known how important they were to her. But I couldn't say that without sounding like I was keeping score. "I'm happier doing what I'm doing now," I said, which was true but incomplete. "But financially, we're fine financially. For now. But what about the future? What about kids? College funds? Retirement?" These weren't Sarah's natural concerns. She'd never been particularly materialistic but under constant pressure from her family, she was beginning to question everything about our life together. I wanted to tell her about the company, about the breakthrough algorithms and the client contracts that were beginning to materialize. But something held me back: pride, maybe, or the fear that sharing the dream before it was fully realized would somehow diminish it. So, I kept working in silence while her family whispered poison in her ear, each conversation designed to make her doubt not just me, but her own judgment in choosing me. They were playing a long game, and they were winning. I found Sarah's diary purely by accident while looking for our tax documents in her desk drawer. The leather-bound journal was tucked beneath bank statements, and when I pulled it out, a loose page fell to the floor. The words I glimpsed as I bent to retrieve it stopped my heart. I don't know if I made the right choice. I should have closed it immediately, respected her privacy, but the phrase haunted me. That evening, after she'd fallen asleep, I crept back to her desk and opened to that page. What I read there nearly broke me. 5 years married, and I feel more isolated than ever. Not from David. He's still the same kind, brilliant man I fell in love with, but from everyone else. From my family, from the life I thought I'd have, from the person I thought I'd become. Mom called again today. Same conversation, different words. How am I doing? How's David's project going? Have I thought about my future? The subtext is always the same. You're wasting your potential, and we're disappointed in your choices. The hardest part is that I can see their points sometimes. When I watch Amanda arguing cases on the news or hear about Michael's latest promotion, I wonder what my life would look like if I'd made different decisions. Not about David, never about David, but about everything else. I chose teaching because I loved it, chose David because I loved him. But love doesn't pay for the things my family considers essential: the house in the right neighborhood, the private schools for future children, the security that comes with predictable success. David works so hard in that garage, 16 days, weekends, barely taking breaks for meals. I bring him coffee and see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also this fire that I've never seen anywhere else. He believes in what he's building, and I believe in him, but believing doesn't change our bank account or silence my mother's questions. I feel caught between two worlds. In one, I'm the disappointing daughter who chose heart over head, passion over pragmatism. In the other, I'm the unsupportive wife who questions her husband's dreams. There's no middle ground where I can just be Sarah, happy with my choices and confident in my marriage. Today, Dad suggested lunch again, just the two of us. These lunches have become interrogations disguised as bonding time. He'll ask about David's progress, suggest career alternatives, remind me subtly of all the advantages I'm missing by not being married to someone from our world. I love my family, but I'm starting to resent their constant interference, and I hate that I'm starting to see David through their eyes sometimes, not as the man I chose, but as the limitation they believe he represents. The worst part is that David notices. He's too perceptive not to see how these conversations affect me, how I withdraw after family gatherings, how I've started asking questions about his timeline and projections. He's patient with my doubts, understanding about my family's concerns, but I can see the hurt in his eyes. I'm losing pieces of myself to this conflict. The woman who confidently chose love over status is being eroded by constant pressure to justify that choice. I don't want to become someone who measures worth by bank statements and social position, but I also don't want to be naive about practical realities. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like to call Mom and tell her I'm getting divorced. The relief in her voice would be instant, followed by plans to introduce me to appropriate men who could give me the life she believes I deserve. The thought makes me sick. David is not a limitation. He's not a mistake. He's the best man I've ever known, and I chose him for reasons that have nothing to do with my family's expectations. But knowing that and feeling it consistently are different things when you're under constant pressure to doubt your own judgment. I need to find a way to honor both my love for David and my connection to my family without sacrificing either. But right now, it feels impossible. They've made David the enemy of my potential, and I don't know how to prove them wrong without betraying the man I love. Maybe the problem isn't David's ambition or my family's expectations. Maybe the problem is that I've forgotten who I am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. I closed the journal with trembling hands, my heart breaking for the woman I'd married. Sarah was drowning in competing loyalties, torn between the life she'd chosen and the approval she'd always known. Her family's campaign wasn't just targeting MIT, was destroying her sense of self, making her question fundamental decisions about love, success, and happiness. The next morning, I watched her over coffee with new understanding. The slight tension around her eyes, the way she checked her phone anxiously, the careful way she spoke about her family, all of it made sense now. She wasn't just defending me to her family. She was defending her own choices, her own judgment, her own right to define success on her terms. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing my scrutiny. "I love you," I said, meaning it more deeply than ever before. She smiled, but I could see the weight she carried. "I love you too." What she didn't know was that her faith in me was about to be vindicated in ways none of us could imagine. The garage project was nearing a breakthrough that would change everything, not just our financial situation, but the entire dynamic with her family. Soon, very soon, she wouldn't have to choose between love and approval. She could have both. Thanksgiving 2022 was the last family gathering I would voluntarily attend. The seating chart Patricia had prepared told the entire story of my place, and their world literally mapped out my exclusion for everyone to see. The Richmond family dining room could accommodate 12 people comfortably, with Richard presiding at the head and Patricia at the foot. Traditionally, family members sat in order of importance and affection. Michael and Jennifer flanked Richard's right side with their children. Amanda claimed the honored position to Patricia's right, and there, squeezed between the children's booster seats and the kitchen door, was my assigned place. The spot where servers would normally sit, if the Richmonds employed help, the chair that required standing up every time someone needed to access the kitchen, the position that made conversation with adults nearly impossible, while ensuring I'd be constantly interrupted by requests to pass this or help with that. Sarah's place was across the table, nestled between Amanda and her mother, family members only. The seating seemed to declare. When she saw the arrangement, a flush crept up her neck. "Mom, this doesn't seem— Oh, it's fine," Patricia said breezily. "David doesn't mind helping out, do you, David?" What could I say? That I minded being treated like hired help at my own family's dinner? That after 5 years of marriage, I deserved better than the servant's seat? The dinner conversation followed its predictable pattern, but the seating arrangement made my exclusion more pronounced than ever. Michael dominated discussion with stories about his latest acquisition deal, dropping dollar figures that made Sarah fidget with her napkin. Amanda held court about a high-profile case that had made national news, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving tribute. Amanda's being mentioned as a potential candidate for state attorney general, Patricia announced, her voice ringing with pride. "The governor's office has been making inquiries." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, but I could hear the strain in her voice. "Of course, it would mean relocating to the capital," Richard added, "but Amanda's always been willing to make sacrifices for success. It's a family trait." The implication was clear. Amanda was willing to sacrifice for success. Sarah, by staying in our small town with her teacher's salary and unsuitable husband, was not. From my corner position, I watched the family dynamics play out like a theater performance. The way they leaned toward each other when speaking, creating an intimate circle that excluded me. The inside jokes and references to events I hadn't been invited to. The casual mentions of vacation plans and social gatherings that assumed my absence. "David, could you help bring in the gravy?" Patricia asked, during a lull in conversation. I stood, grateful for something to do, and made my way to the kitchen. But as I reached for the gravy boat, I heard Amanda's voice carry from the dining room. "I worry about Sarah sometimes," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough to ensure I'd hear. "She's got so much potential, but she seems stuck, like she's afraid to reach for more." "Marriage can be limiting," Michael agreed, "especially when there's an imbalance in ambition." "Now, children," Patricia said, but her tone suggested mild reproof rather than genuine disapproval. "Sarah made her choices." "But did she really?" Amanda continued. "Or did she just settle for the first man who paid attention to her? She was always the romantic one, always believing in fairy tales." I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, gravy boat in hand, listening to my wife's family dissect our marriage like a failed business venture. "The sad thing is, she could still change course," Richard said quietly. "She's only 32, plenty of time to build a real life with someone appropriate." When I returned to the table, Sarah was staring at her plate, her face pale. She heard every word. Our eyes met across the table, and I saw 5 years of accumulated pain and frustration reflected back at me. Not anger at her family, but something worse out about us. The breaking point came during dessert. Patricia was serving her famous apple pie, making sure everyone received equal portions with comments about family recipes and traditions. When she reached my corner, she placed a noticeably smaller slice in front of me. "David's watching his figure," she said with that practiced smile. "Aren't you, David?" It was such a small thing, a piece of pie, but it represented everything that death by 1,000 cuts. The constant reminders that I didn't belong, would never belong, would always be the charity case they tolerated for their daughter's sake. I set down my fork and looked around the table, Michael smirking into his wine glass, Amanda checking her phone as if my presence bored her, Richard studying his pie with exaggerated interest, Patricia beaming as if she'd just performed an act of kindness, and Sarah staring at me with a mixture of embarrassment and resignation that broke my heart. "Thank you for dinner," I said, standing. "It was lovely as always." "David," Sarah called as I headed for the door. "I'll be in the car," I said without turning around. I sat in our Honda Civic for 45 minutes, watching through the dining room window as the family continued their celebration without missing a beat. Sarah remained at the table, trapped between loyalty to me and loyalty to them, choosing them by staying. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red. "You can't just walk out like that," she said as she got in the car. "Watch me, they're my family, David. I can't just cut them off." "I'm not asking you to cut them off. I'm saying I won't subject myself to their abuse anymore." It wasn't abuse, it was just what, normal, acceptable, the way people should treat family? She started crying then, quiet tears that broke my heart. "I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm losing everyone I love." I reached over and took her hand. "You're not losing me. But I won't keep pretending that what they do is okay. I won't keep showing up to be their punching bag just to make family gatherings easier for everyone else." "So what happens now? Now you go to family events without me? You make whatever excuses you need to make. And maybe, someday, they'll realize what they've lost." What I didn't tell her was that someday was coming sooner than any of us imagined. The company was about to announce partnerships that would change everything. But first, I needed to stop being their victim and start being the man I was becoming in that garage, someone who didn't need their approval to know his own worth. The first major client contract arrived 2 weeks after my Thanksgiving walkout. Mid-Atlantic Insurance Group, a Fortune 500 company with over 2 million policyholders, had agreed to a 6-month pilot program for TechShield's predictive security platform. The contract value? $2.3 million. I stared at the signed documents in my garage office, surrounded by the humming servers that had become my closest companions. After 3 years of 18-hour days, countless rejections, and bootstrap funding that had nearly bankrupted us, someone finally understood what I'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Sarah's family dismissed me as an underachiever with a computer hobby, I was negotiating contracts larger than Richard's annual salary. While they questioned my ambition and earning potential, I was building something that would revolutionize corporate cybersecurity, but I told no one. The decision to keep quiet wasn't born from spite, though I'd be lying if I said revenge didn't play a small part. Mostly it came from a deeper understanding of what success meant to me versus what it meant to them. The Richmond family equated worth with recognition, status with social acceptance. They needed external validation to feel valuable. I'd discovered something different in that garage. I'd found the pure satisfaction of solving problems that mattered, of creating something that protected people's most sensitive information from increasingly sophisticated threats. The work itself was the reward. The money, when it came, would be a byproduct of impact rather than the goal itself. Sarah noticed the change in my demeanor almost immediately. "You seem different lately," she said one evening, finding me in the garage reviewing client onboarding documents. "Happier somehow. Just making progress on some projects," I said, which was technically true. "Good progress? Very good progress." She lingered in the doorway, and I could see her wrestling with whether to ask for details. Since Thanksgiving, we'd established an unspoken agreement she wouldn't press me about my work, and I wouldn't pressure her about her family. But the curiosity was killing her. "David, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you say you're making progress, do you mean real progress? Like the kind that might change things for us?" I looked up from my laptop and met her eyes. "Yes, real progress." She nodded, and I saw relief flood her features. Not because of potential money, but because she'd been carrying the weight of her family's doubts about my capabilities. Knowing that I was succeeding even without details validated her faith in me. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Whatever you're building out here, I'm proud of you for not giving up." The Mid-Atlantic contract led to 3 more within 2 months. Citibank wanted a pilot program for their commercial lending division. Tech healthcare systems needed protection for patient data across 14 hospitals. Global Manufacturing Corp was hemorrhaging intellectual property to overseas competitors and needed immediate intervention. By spring 2023, TechShield was generating 7 figures in annual revenue. I'd hired 4 employees, brilliant programmers, and security experts who understood the vision and shared the passion. We'd moved beyond the garage to a small office complex, though I maintained the garage as my primary workspace for sentimental reasons. The beauty of the cybersecurity industry was its invisibility. When our systems worked perfectly, no one noticed. Companies paid substantial fees for problems that never materialized, threats that never emerged, breaches that never happened. It was the ultimate behind-the-scenes business, which suited my temperament perfectly. I could have told Sarah's family, could have casually mentioned the client roster during one of their interrogations about my computer thing, could have dropped revenue figures that would have silenced their concerns about my earning potential. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of that Thanksgiving seating chart, the visual representation of exactly how much they valued my presence. Maybe it was the accumulation of 5 years' worth of dismissive comments and polite condescension. Or maybe it was the understanding that their approval would change the fundamental nature of what I'd built. In the garage, working in silence, I'd created something pure, something driven by passion and purpose, rather than the need to prove myself worthy of inclusion. The moment I revealed it to them, it would become currency in their system of value. Impressive, certainly, but also subject to their judgments and expectations. Sarah attended family events alone now, citing my work commitments as explanation for my absence. I could see the relief in her posture when she returned from these gatherings. Without me there as a focal point for criticism, the conversations shifted to other topics. Her relationship with her family began to heal, even as mine remained severed. "They ask about you," she'd report after particularly significant events. "What, do you tell them? That you're working on something important? That you're happy? That we're happy? And what do they say?" Mom usually changes the subject. Dad asks if you're making any money yet. Amanda suggests I should be concerned about work-life balance. The same patterns, the same assumptions. I was still the dreamer, wasting time on impractical pursuits. The husband who was failing to provide adequate security for their precious daughter. What they didn't know was that their daughter was married to someone who was quietly building an empire, one revolutionary algorithm at a time. The silence became a form of power. Every dismissive comment they made, every concern they expressed about my prospects, every suggestion that Sarah deserved better, all of it accumulated like interest in a bank account. Someday, the truth would emerge, and the compound effect would be spectacular. But that day wasn't today. Today, I had systems to build, clients to serve, and a company to grow. The garage lights burned late into the night, and the work continued in blessed, productive silence. The bank statement that arrived in November 2023 showed a number that made me dizzy: $12.7 million in total assets across business and personal accounts. TechShield Solutions had become exactly what I'd envisioned in those early garage days of cybersecurity powerhouse, protecting some of the world's largest corporations from threats they didn't even know existed. The transformation had happened, gradually, then all at once. What started as a few pilot programs had evolved into comprehensive security partnerships. Mid-Atlantic Insurance had renewed their contract at triple the original rate after our systems prevented what their forensics team estimated would have been a $50 million data breach. Word spread through their industry networks, and suddenly, my phone rang constantly with corporations desperate for protection. I'd moved the primary operations to a 15,000 square foot facility across town, complete with a state-of-the-art security operations center that monitored threats in real. The garage remained my thinking space, the place where I developed new algorithms and tested breakthrough theories. But the business had outgrown its humble origins. My team had expanded to 23 employees, including some of the brightest minds I'd ever encountered. Dr. Rebecca Chen had left her position as head of cybersecurity at Stanford to join as our chief technology officer. Marcus Rodriguez, a former NSA analyst, ran our threat intelligence division. Sarah Kim, barely 25 but already legendary in hacker circles, led our penetration testing team. They called me the prophet because of my ability to predict attack vectors before they materialized. What they didn't know was that my success came from understanding something fundamental about human nature. Criminals are lazy, and they'll always choose the path of least resistance. Build enough barriers, make the easy targets hard enough, and they'll move on to someone else. The revenue growth was staggering. Month over month, quarter over quarter, the numbers climbed steadily upward. We'd signed contracts with 3 Fortune 100 companies, protected government agencies I couldn't name publicly, and developed proprietary systems that were years ahead of anything our competitors offered. But with success came complications I hadn't anticipated. The weight of keeping such massive achievements secret was becoming unbearable. Every day, I made decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. Every evening, I came home to Sarah asking gentle questions about my projects, while her family continued to wonder if I'd ever amount to anything. The internal contradiction was eating me alive. In the business world, I was becoming a respected figure, invited to speak at conferences, quoted in industry publications, sought out by venture capitalists offering valuations that defied rational explanation. At family gatherings I no longer attended, I remained the disappointing son-in-law with no clear prospects. The Peterson Group wants to acquire us, I told Sarah one evening, unable to keep the news entirely to myself. They've offered enough money to buy a small country? That's wonderful, she said, though I could see her trying to process the implications. Are you going to accept? I don't think so. We're building something special, something that could change how the entire world thinks about digital security. She nodded, though I wasn't sure she understood the magnitude of what I was describing. How could she have been so careful to downplay my work that even my own wife didn't fully grasp what I'd created? The acquisition offer had been serious. $127 million for full ownership of TechShield, with guaranteed employment contracts for key personnel and performance bonuses that could double the purchase price. It was life-changing money, generational wealth that would have silenced every criticism her family had ever made about my prospects. But it was also the end of the dream. The Peterson Group wanted our technology, our client relationships, and our team, but they didn't share the vision that had driven me through those early 18-hour days. They saw profit potential where I saw the chance to protect people's most valuable digital assets. I'd declined politely, which had led to revised offers that grew increasingly desperate. The final proposal, $200 million plus equity, in my inbox like a nuclear weapon, powerful enough to obliterate every assumption Sarah's family had ever made about my capabilities. Still, I hesitated to reveal the truth. The secrecy had become part of my identity, the hidden achievement that validated my worth independent of external recognition. In a strange way, keeping quiet was its own form of success, proof that I didn't need their approval to build something extraordinary. Sarah noticed my growing restlessness during this period. I'd catch her watching me with curious eyes, clearly sensing that something significant was happening but respecting my apparent need for privacy. The trust she showed during these months meant more to me than any contract or acquisition offer. "Are you happy?" she asked one night, as we sat on our deck looking up at stars barely visible through the suburban light pollution. "Yes," I said, and meant it. "Are you? I'm proud of you. I don't know exactly what you're building, but I can see that it matters to you. That's enough for me." It should have been enough for me too, but as the holiday season approached, our first Christmas since I'd stopped attending family gatherings, found myself wondering what would happen if the truth came out. Not through my choice, but through circumstances beyond my control. The business press had started taking notice of TechShield's rapid growth. Industry publications were requesting interviews. Conference organizers wanted me as a keynote speaker. The very success I'd worked so hard to achieve was making anonymity increasingly impossible. Soon, very soon, the secret would be revealed. The only question was whether I'd control that revelation, or whether it would control me. As I sat under those distant stars, I realized that 5 years of proving myself in silence was about to pay dividends none of us could have imagined. The Cybersecurity Excellence Award arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 2023, delivered by courier in an elegant wooden box that seemed too formal for our modest home. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a crystal trophy engraved with words that made my chest tight with pride. David Matthews, TechShield Solutions, Innovator of the Year, Cybersecurity Industry Association. I held the award in my hands, feeling its weight, and thought about all the people who would never see it. Sarah was at school, teaching her third graders about multiplication tables. Her family was going about their daily routines, completely unaware that the man they'd dismissed as a dreamer had just received the industry's highest honor. The award ceremony had been held in San Francisco, a black-tie affair, attended by CEOs, government officials, and technology leaders from around the world. I'd stood on that stage, looking out at an audience of 3,000 people, and delivered an acceptance speech about the responsibility we all shared to protect digital privacy. In an increasingly connected world, innovation doesn't happen in boardrooms, I'd told them. It happens in garages and basements, in the quiet spaces where passionate people work on problems that matter. Sometimes the most revolutionary solutions come from the most unlikely places. The applause had been thunderous, and afterward, I'd been approached by executives from companies whose names dominated the business pages. Venture capitalists had pressed cards into my hands, offering funding packages that would have valued tech at $500 million. Government representatives had hinted at contracts so classified they couldn't be discussed in public. And through it all, I'd thought about Sarah's family, about their certainty that I lacked ambition and prospects. The irony was delicious and heartbreaking in equal measure. I placed the award in my garage office. On a shelf between technical manuals and family photos, it would remain there, hidden like everything else I'd achieved. A secret symbol of success that nobody would ever see. That recognition hadn't stopped with the industry award. MIT had invited me to deliver a guest lecture on predictive threat. Modeling. Harvard Business School wanted me for a case study on bootstrap entrepreneurship. The Wall Street Journal had run a profile piece titled, The Security Prophet, How One Man's Algorithm Protects Millions. Though they'd honored my request to keep personal details minimal, each accolade felt like vindication, proof that the path I'd chosen in that garage had been right all along. But each also deepened the weight of secrecy I carried. I was living a double life, the unsuccessful son-in-law who couldn't provide adequately for their daughter, and the industry leader whose innovations were reshaping corporate cybersecurity. Sarah sensed the change in me during this period. Was a confidence in my step that hadn't been there before, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing my worth, independent of external validation. She'd catch me smiling at nothing, or notice how I no longer flinched when she mentioned her family's concerns about our future. You're different lately, she observed one evening, finding me reading congratulatory emails from industry leaders. More settled somehow? Just feeling good about the work, I said, which was true but incomplete. Good enough to maybe think about sharing some details. I know you like to keep things private, but I'd love to understand what you're building out here. I almost told her then, almost opened my laptop and showed her the client list, the revenue reports. The industry recognition that proved her faith in me had been justified all along, but something held me back, not distrust, but the understanding that once the secret was revealed, everything would change. The award represented more than professional achievement. It was validation of a philosophy that had sustained me through 5 years of family rejection. Success didn't require their approval or understanding. Worth wasn't determined by their measures of accomplishment. I could build something extraordinary while they remained convinced of my mediocrity. But keeping such significant achievements secret was taking its toll. I found myself drafting emails to Richard, imagining his face when he learned about the award, the contracts, the industry recognition. I pictured Patricia's expression when she discovered that her daughter had married someone whose computer hobby was protecting Fortune 500 companies from cyber threats. The fantasies were satisfying, but ultimately hollow. Revenge through revelation would feel good for a moment, but it would also reduce my achievements to weapons in a family conflict. The work deserved better than that. The people whose data we protected deserved better than that. So the award sat on my garage shelf, gathering dust among the technical manuals and forgotten coffee mugs, a symbol of excellence hidden in plain sight, known only to the cooling fans and blinking servers that had become my most trusted confidants. Soon, though, the choice to remain hidden would be taken out of my hands. Industry recognition had a way of attracting attention from unexpected quarters, and the business press was beginning to take notice of TechShield's rapid ascent. The question wasn't whether my secret would be revealed, but when and how. As I looked at that crystal trophy gleaming under the garage's fluorescent lights, I realized that 5 years of silence was about to come to an end. The only uncertainty was whether the revelation would bring vindication or simply create new complications I hadn't anticipated. Either way, the garage days were numbered. Soon, very soon, the world would know what I'd built in the shadows, including the family who'd never believed I could build anything at all. The email from Forbes arrived on a gray December morning, buried among vendor invoices and client communications. At first I thought it was spam. Too many business emails claimed prestigious magazine connections, but the sender's credentials checked out, and the message itself was both professional and persistent. Mr. Matthews, I'm Alina Rodriguez, Senior Technology Correspondent for Forbes magazine. I'm working on a feature story about emerging leaders in cybersecurity, and your name has come up repeatedly in my research. Industry insiders describe TechShield Solutions as the most innovative security platform of the decade, and you as the mind behind the next generation of threat prevention. I'd very much like to speak with you about your company's remarkable growth trajectory. I stared at the email for 10 minutes, my coffee growing cold as I processed the implications. Forbes wasn't some trade publication with limited circulation. This was the magazine that defined business success in America, read by CEOs, investors, and decision-makers across every industry. A Forbes feature would make anonymity impossible. My first instinct was to decline politely. The comfortable secrecy I'd maintained for 3 years would evaporate the moment that article published. Sarah's family would learn everything: the client roster, the revenue figures, the industry recognition they'd never bothered to notice. The careful balance I'd maintained between professional success and personal privacy would be obliterated. But as I read Elena's follow-up messages over the next few days, I began to understand that declining wasn't really an option. She'd already interviewed my competitors, my clients, and my employees. The story was happening with or without my cooperation. The choice was between controlling the narrative or watching someone else tell my story. Dr. Chen speaks very highly of your leadership, one email read. She mentioned that you turned down acquisition offers worth hundreds of millions of dollars because you believed TechShield could change how the world thinks about cybersecurity. That's exactly the kind of visionary thinking our readers want to understand. Rebecca had been interviewed. That meant the Forbes team had access to insider information about company valuations, strategic decisions, and growth projections. They knew about the acquisition offers, the client contracts, the expansion plans. The secret was already compromised. I agreed to the interview on December 10th, with the understanding that the article would run in their year-end 30 under 30 special issue. Though at 47, I was notably over their traditional age demographic. We're making an exception, Alina explained during our preliminary call. Your story represents something unique. Bootstrap entrepreneurship succeeding at the highest levels, without venture capital or traditional business networks. The interview took place in my garage office. At my insistence, Alina seemed charmed by the setting, taking photos of the servers and monitors that had become my second home. She asked about my background, my motivation, the early struggles of building a company. Without external funding, most entrepreneurs in your position would have taken the acquisition money and moved on, she observed. Why did you turn down offers worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes? I'd thought about this question for months. Ever since the Peterson Group had first approached us, money was never the primary motivation, I said finally. The goal was to build something that mattered, something that could protect people's digital lives in an increasingly connected world. Taking acquisition money would have meant giving up control of that mission, but surely financial success matters. You've built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Financial success is validation that the market values what we've created, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is making the digital world safer for everyone. Elena's questions grew more personal as the interview progressed. She asked about my family, my background, the challenges of building a company while maintaining work-life balance. I kept my answers general, focusing on the business rather than personal dynamics. Industry insiders tell me you're somewhat of a mystery, she said near the end of our conversation. You don't attend many conferences, you rarely give interviews, and you've managed to build one of the fastest-growing companies in cybersecurity, while maintaining an almost invisible public profile. Is that intentional? I prefer to let the work speak for itself, I said. The technology industry has enough self-promotion. I'd rather focus on solving problems than marketing solutions. After Alina left, I sat in the garage for hours, staring at the equipment that had made everything possible. In 3 weeks, when the Forbes issue hit newsstands, my life would change irrevocably. The careful separation between my professional achievements and my family relationships would collapse. Sarah would finally understand the magnitude of what I'd built. Her family would discover that the man they'd dismissed as unambitious had created something extraordinary. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. Vindication felt within reach, but so did a new set of complications I couldn't fully anticipate. Would Sarah be proud or hurt that I'd kept such significant achievements secret? Would her family's newfound respect feel genuine or merely transactional? Elena's photographer had captured images of me in the garage, surrounded by the humble beginnings that had grown into something remarkable. Those photos would soon appear in millions of copies of America's most influential business magazine, alongside a story that would make privacy impossible. Publication date is December 23rd. Elena had mentioned as she packed up her equipment. Perfect timing for the holidays. Perfect timing indeed. Christmas dinner with Sarah's family had always been the most challenging gathering of the year. This Christmas, it would be unlike anything any of us had experienced before. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos Elena's team had taken. In one, I was leaning against a server rack, looking thoughtful and determined. In another, I was pointing at lines of code on a monitor, explaining some technical detail. These images would soon define me in the public consciousness not as the unsuccessful son who couldn't provide adequately for his wife, but as the innovative entrepreneur who'd built something revolutionary. The transformation was already beginning, and there was no way to stop it now. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter on Christmas Eve morning, reviewing the handwritten menu she'd prepared for tomorrow's dinner: prime rib, roasted vegetables, Patricia's famous sweet potato casserole, and Richard's preferred wine selection, every detail carefully planned to ensure family harmony. What she didn't know was that this would be the last normal Christmas preparation we'd ever have. "You're sure you don't want to come this year?" she asked for the third time that week, her voice carrying a familiar mixture of hope and resignation. "Mom specifically asked if you'd be joining us." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been monitoring system alerts from clients whose operations never stopped, even for holidays. The irony of Patricia's invitation wasn't lost on me after years of making my presence unwelcome. She was now concerned about my absence. Perhaps my empty chair had become as conspicuous as my occupied one had once been. "I'm sure," I said gently, "you'll have a better time without me there. No tension, no awkward conversations about my computer hobby." Sarah winced at my use of her mother's dismissive phrase. "They're trying to be better about that. Mom's been asking about your work more often." "Asking what, exactly? Whether you're making progress. Whether you think it might lead to something stable. You know, parent questions." I almost laughed. If Patricia only knew what something stable looked like when it generated 8-figure annual revenue and protected the digital infrastructure of Fortune 500 companies. But she'd find out soon enough. The Forbes issue was scheduled to hit tomorrow morning, Christmas Day. Elena had sent me an advance copy the previous week, and seeing my face on the cover still felt surreal. The security prophet, how David Matthews built a cybersecurity empire from his garage, dominated the cover, with a photo of me looking confident and determined among my servers. The article itself was everything I'd hoped for and dreaded simultaneously. 6 pages of detailed coverage including revenue figures, client testimonials, and industry expert opinions about TechShield's revolutionary approach to threat prediction. Elena had interviewed my team, my clients, and my competitors, painting a picture of someone who'd fundamentally changed how corporations thought about digital security. "Mr. Matthews has achieved something remarkable," one cybersecurity expert was quoted as saying. "He's created a platform that doesn't just respond to threats, it predicts and prevents them. What he's built in his garage is more sophisticated than systems developed by teams of hundreds at major corporations." The financial details were all there too. Revenue projections, growth trajectories, and estimates of company valuation that ranged from conservative at $300 million to optimistic at over $500 million. The Peterson Group's acquisition offers were mentioned, along with my reasons for declining them. But perhaps most significantly, the article positioned me as a thought leader whose ideas were shaping the future of an entire industry. Quotes from my conference presentations, excerpts from my academic papers, and testimonials from government officials painted a picture of influence that extended far beyond mere financial success. Sarah had no idea any of this existed. She'd continued attending family gatherings alone, deflecting their questions about my prospects while I'd been quietly building something that would redefine their understanding of success entirely. "The seating arrangement is interesting this year," she mentioned, still reviewing her preparation notes. "Mom, put your usual spot back in the main arrangement, even though you won't be there." She said it felt wrong to leave you out completely. Even in my absence, I remained a source of complexity for them. The empty chair would be a conversation starter, a reminder of the family member who'd chosen to stay away rather than endure. Another year of subtle dismissal. "What will you tell them when they ask about me? That you're working, that you're happy with your projects, that we're good?" She paused, then added quietly, "that I wish they'd make more effort to understand you." The loyalty in her voice broke my heart. For 5 years, she'd defended choices that her family couldn't comprehend, maintaining faith in me when everyone around her suggested she was settling for less than she deserved. Tomorrow, that faith would be vindicated in ways she couldn't imagine. I watched her continue her preparations, making lists and checking details with the careful attention she brought to everything she cared about. In 24 hours, her phone would start ringing with calls from family members who'd seen the Forbes article. By dinner time, the modest gathering she was planning would be transformed into something unprecedented. The magazine would arrive at their doorstep along with the morning paper, delivered by the same carrier who'd brought years' worth of publications that never mentioned my name. Patricia would probably see it first. She was always up early, reading the news with her coffee. Richard might spot it at the country club, where Forbes was displayed prominently in the business reading area. Either way, the revelation would spread quickly through their social network. The man they'd dismissed as unremarkable would suddenly be recognizable as someone remarkable, someone whose opinions mattered to people who mattered. The cognitive dissonance would be profound. "Are you sure you'll be okay tomorrow?" Sarah asked, genuine concern in her voice. "It's Christmas. You shouldn't spend it alone." "I won't be alone," I said. "I'll have work to keep me company." What I didn't tell her was that I'd be monitoring multiple communication channels, watching the ripple effects of revelations spread through her family's social circles. The Forbes article would create a new reality, and I wanted to observe its impact from a safe distance before deciding how to engage with the aftermath. That Sarah finished her preparations and came to sit beside me on the couch, leaning against my shoulder with a contentment that had taken years to develop. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight we were still living in the world where her family's opinion mattered and my achievements remained hidden. "I love you," she said simply. "Whatever happens, however things change, I want you to know that." "Things are going to change," I said, holding her closer. "For the better." "I think so. I hope so." She fell asleep against my shoulder, trusting and peaceful, while I stared at the Christmas tree we'd decorated together and thought about the morning that would alter the trajectory of all our relationships. Forever. Christmas dinner was proceeding exactly as Sarah had planned. The prime rib was perfectly cooked, the wine was flowing freely, and the conversation had settled into its predictable rhythm of family updates and gentle gossip. My empty chair sat like a question mark at the table, acknowledged but not discussed. A reminder of the son-in-law who'd chosen absence over awkwardness. Then the doorbell rang. Patricia paused mid-sentence, her fork halfway to her mouth. Who could that be? Everyone's here already. She glanced meaningfully at my vacant place setting. "I'll get it," Sarah volunteered, but Richard was already rising from his seat. "Probably someone with the wrong address," he said, walking toward the front door. "People get confused on holidays." Through the dining room windows, Sarah could see a woman in a professional-looking coat standing on the front porch, holding what appeared to be a briefcase and some papers. Not a neighbor dropping by with holiday cookies. Then Richard opened the door, and we could hear his voice change from casual irritation to careful politeness. "Good afternoon. I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of Christmas dinner. Mr. Richmond, I'm Elena Rodriguez from Forbes magazine. I'm looking for David Matthews. I believe he's married to your daughter, Sarah." The dining room fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork remained suspended in midair. Patricia's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. "Forbes magazine?" Richard repeated, his banker's training kicking in as he processed the implications. "I'm sorry, but David isn't here today." "Oh," Elena sounded genuinely disappointed. "I was hoping to follow up on our recent interview." "Yeah." Response to our cover story has been extraordinary. Our website crashed this morning from all the traffic. Our readers are fascinated by his story. Cover story. The words hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Cover story. Richard's voice had shifted into his professional mode, the tone he used when gathering information about potential investments. "You haven't seen it yet. The Christmas Day issue, The Security Prophet, How David Matthews Built a Cybersecurity Empire from His Garage. It's been trending on social media all morning. Inc. magazine wants to do a follow-up piece, and we've had calls from 3 different venture capital firms looking for his contact information." Sarah stood up slowly from the table, her napkin falling unnoticed to the floor. "Excuse me," she said quietly, moving toward the front door. Through the doorway, the family could see Elena handing Richard a copy of the magazine. The cover was clearly visible, my photograph, professional and confident, with the headline that would redefine everything they thought they knew about me. "Cybersecurity Empire," Patricia whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Richard was flipping through the article, his eyes scanning the pages with the rapid efficiency of someone accustomed to processing financial information quickly. Sarah appeared beside him, looking over his shoulder at photos of me in the garage, surrounded by the equipment they'd dismissed as a hobby. "Mr. Richmond," Elena's voice carried into the dining room. "Is everything all right?" "I'm sorry, Richard," said his voice carefully controlled. "We weren't aware of this article. David is my son." "Oh, how wonderful. You must be so proud." "The cybersecurity industry is buzzing about his innovations. The article mentions he turned down acquisition offers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That takes real vision. Hundreds of millions." The phrase echoed through the dining room like a physical force. Amanda had moved to the windows, trying to get a better view of the conversation. Michael was checking his phone, probably searching for the online version of the article. Patricia remained frozen at the table, staring at the empty chair where I should have been sitting. Alina, Sarah's voice was barely audible. Could you please come in? I think we need to talk. The next few minutes passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. Alina was gracious and professional, clearly unaware of the family dynamics. Her visit had just exploded. She spoke enthusiastically about the interview, the industry response, and the additional coverage planned for upcoming issues. David was incredibly modest during our conversation, she told the assembled family. He kept emphasizing the technology rather than the business success. But the numbers speak for themselves. TechShield is projected to generate over $50 million in revenue this year alone. $50 million in revenue. From the man they'd worried might never provide adequately for their daughter. When you see him, Alina continued, handing Sarah her business card, please tell him that the response has been overwhelming. We've never had a technology feature generate this much reader engagement. Harvard Business School wants to include him in their entrepreneurship curriculum. After Alina left, the family stood in the living room, passing the Forbes issue between them like evidence in a criminal trial. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I need to call David, Sarah said finally, her voice hollow with shock. Sarah, Patricia began, but she was already heading for her phone. All these years, Michael said quietly, reading over Amanda's shoulder. All these years, we thought he was just unsuccessful, Amanda finished. We thought he was unsuccessful. Richard was studying the financial projections with professional fascination. These revenue figures, if they're accurate, his company is worth more than my entire bank. The acquisition offers alone. Patrice's voice trailed off as she processed numbers that made their own considerable wealth seem modest. Sarah returned from making her call, her face pale. He's not answering. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Of course it did. I was sitting in my garage, monitoring the digital fallout from the article's publication, watching as my secret life became public knowledge. I'd seen Elena's visit through our security cameras, watched the family's reaction unfold from a safe distance. We need to find him, Sarah said, a note of panic creeping into her voice. We need to explain. Explain what? Richard asked quietly. That we've spent 5 years telling him he wasn't good enough for our family while he was building something extraordinary. The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Elena's business card sat on the coffee table, a small white rectangle that had just rearranged their entire understanding of success, ambition, and the man they'd never bothered to really know. Christmas dinner sat abandoned on the table, getting cold while they absorbed the reality that the family failure was actually the family's greatest success story, and he wasn't there to witness their shock, their embarrassment, or their dawning understanding of what they'd lost through years of casual dismissal. The empty chair at their table had never been more significant. By 8 o'clock that evening, Sarah's family had read the Forbes article 3 times, Googled every mention of my name they could find, and discovered the full scope of what I'd built while they remained convinced of my mediocrity. The revelation was staggering not just in its financial implications, but in what it revealed about their own judgment. Richard sat in his study, surrounded by printouts of articles from TechCrunch, Wired, and the Wall Street Journal, all featuring coverage of TechShield's innovations and my industry recognition. The timeline was devastating. While they'd been questioning my prospects, I'd been winning awards, signing Fortune 500 contracts, and turning down acquisition offers worth more than his lifetime earnings. The Cybersecurity Industry Association named him Innovator of the Year, he announced to the family gathered in the living room, his voice carrying the disbelief of someone processing impossible information. 6 months ago, the same month Mom asked Sarah if I thought David would ever find real employment. Patricia winced at the reminder of her own words. She was holding the company valuation documents Alina had shared, staring at numbers that made her charitable foundation's annual budget look like pocket change. $500 million, she whispered. They estimate his company is worth $500 million. Conservative estimate, Amanda corrected, looking up from her laptop. PitchBook has TechShield valued at closer to $700 million based on recent venture capital interest, and he's maintained majority ownership throughout the growth. Michael was perhaps the most shaken by the revelation. As the family's acknowledged business success, he'd spent years patronizing me about career advancement and financial planning. Now he was confronting the reality that my garage hobby generated more monthly revenue than his bank's largest commercial accounts. Look at this client list, he said, scrolling through the Forbes article on his phone. Citibank, insurance, 3 government agencies he can't name publicly. He's protecting the digital infrastructure of organizations I wish I could get meetings with. Sarah had been unusually quiet throughout the evening's discoveries, processing not just the magnitude of my success, but the implications of my secrecy. Why had I kept such extraordinary achievements hidden? What did it say about our marriage that I'd felt unable to share this part of my life? He must have been planning to tell us eventually, she said, though her voice carried uncertainty. People don't build companies worth hundreds of millions and keep it secret forever, unless they have good reason to, Amanda observed quietly. The room fell silent as they contemplated what those reasons might be. 5 years of dismissive comments, polite condescension, and genuine bewilderment about what Sarah saw in me. 5 years of making me feel like an outsider who'd somehow tricked their daughter into settling for less than she deserved. The acquisition offers, Patricia said suddenly, reading from another section of the article. It says he turned down $200 million because he believed the company could change how the world thinks about cybersecurity. That's not lack of ambition, that's vision. While we were worried about him providing for Sarah, Richard added with growing horror at their own blindness, she's married to someone who could retire tomorrow and live like royalty for the rest of his life. The most damning details emerged as they dug deeper into the coverage. Industry conferences where I'd been the keynote speaker while they wondered if I'd ever find stable employment, academic papers published in prestigious journals while they questioned my intellectual capacity, government consulting contracts while they worried about my ability to support a family. MIT invited him to guest lecture, Amanda announced, finding another article. Harvard Business School wants to write a case study about his company. Stanford offered him a faculty position. Each revelation felt like evidence in a trial where they were simultaneously prosecutor, defendant, and jury. The case against their own judgment was overwhelming, built from years of assumptions that had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. What kind of people are we? Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What kind of family treats someone like that? The kind that judges worth by appearances, Sarah said, finally speaking the truth they'd all been avoiding. The kind that assumes success only looks one way, sounds one way, comes from one type of background. The company valuation document spread across the coffee table told a story of methodical brilliance that had been invisible to them, growth that defied industry norms, client retention rates that suggested not just satisfaction but genuine innovation, technology that experts described as revolutionary and paradigm-shifting. He was building this the whole time, Michael said, studying the timeline. While we were having those conversations about Sarah's future, about whether she was settling, he was creating something extraordinary. In his garage, Patricia added, remembering her own dismissive references to his computer thing, he was changing an entire industry in his garage while we acted like he was wasting time. The psychological impact was perhaps harder to process than the financial revelation. They'd prided themselves on being good judges of character, successful, people who understood value and potential. The discovery that they'd completely misread someone so close to them challenged fundamental assumptions about their own perceptiveness. The worst part, Richard said quietly, is that he never defended himself, never mentioned any of this during our discussions about his prospects. Because he didn't need our approval, Amanda realized. He knew what he was building was important. Our opinion was irrelevant to his success. Sarah was reading the article for the fourth time, focusing on quotes that revealed the man she'd married but her family had never bothered to know. Listen to this. Matthews believes that technology should serve people, not profit margins. His decision to maintain independence despite substantial acquisition offers reflects a commitment to his original mission, making the digital world safer for everyone. That David described in Forbes was someone driven by purpose rather than recognition. Someone whose success was measured by impact rather than status. It was exactly the man Sarah had fallen in love with, but completely different from the person her family had convinced themselves she'd married. As the evening wore on, the family's shock gave way to a more complex emotion, shame, not just embarrassment at their error in judgment, but genuine remorse for the pain they'd caused. The empty chair at Christmas dinner suddenly represented something much larger than a missing family member, symbolized their failure to see worth in someone whose contributions were reshaping an entire industry. We owe him an apology, Patricia said finally. A real apology, not just for being wrong about his potential, but for making him feel unwelcome in his own family. If he'll accept it, Sarah said quietly, if he ever wants to see any of us again. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the suburban landscape where I'd spent 5 years building something remarkable. While being treated as unremarkable, the Forbes article had done more than reveal my professional success. It had exposed the depth of their misunderstanding and the cost of their prejudice. Tomorrow, they would have to figure out how to rebuild relationships with someone they'd never really tried to understand. But tonight, they sat with the weight of revelation, processing the discovery that the man they'd dismissed as ordinary was actually extraordinary. The handwritten letters arrived at my office 3 days after Christmas, delivered by courier in Patricia's distinctive cream-colored stationery, 4 envelopes, each bearing a different family member's careful script, containing apologies that had clearly taken considerable thought and multiple drafts to compose. I read them in the garage, surrounded by the servers and monitors that had become my refuge during 5 years of family conflict. The irony wasn't lost on me. The space they'd dismissed as evidence of my lack of ambition was now recognized as the birthplace of something extraordinary. Patricia's letter was the longest, written in her elegant handwriting with frequent crossouts and revisions visible beneath the careful script. Dear David, I have spent the last 3 days trying to find words adequate to express my shame and regret, and I have come to understand that no such words exist. What we did to you, what I did to you, was inexcusable. We judged you by standards that revealed our own limitations rather than any deficiency in your character or capabilities. For 5 years, you endured our dismissive comments, our subtle condescension, and our genuine bewilderment about Sarah's choice with a grace I now realize was extraordinary. You never defended yourself, never revealed what you were building, never used your achievements as weapons against our ignorance. That restraint speaks to a strength of character we were too blind to recognize. I called you unambitious while you were revolutionizing an entire industry. I questioned your prospects. While you were turning down offers worth hundreds of millions of dollars, I worried about Sarah's future while she was married to someone whose vision and integrity far exceeded anything our social circle could produce. The Forbes article has been shared throughout our community, and the response has been humbling. People we've known for decades are asking how we could have been so wrong about someone so remarkable. I have no answer except ignorance and prejudice disguised as concern for our daughter. I don't expect forgiveness, because I'm not sure I would forgive such sustained blindness if our positions were reversed. But I wanted you to know that I recognize the magnitude of our error and the pain we caused. Sarah chose better than we deserved when she chose you, and we were too proud to admit it. If you ever decide you can tolerate our presence again, we would be honored to learn who you really are, rather than who we imagined you to be. Until then, please accept my profound apologies and my newfound respect for what you've accomplished. With deep regret and growing admiration, Patricia Richards' letter was characteristically direct, written in the precise language of someone accustomed to dealing with uncomfortable financial realities. David, I owe you an apology that is 5 years overdue. As someone who prides himself on identifying potential and assessing character, my complete failure to recognize your extraordinary capabilities represents the worst professional and personal judgment of my career. Your company's valuation exceeds that of my bank by a factor of 3. Your annual revenue surpasses what I generate from 40 years of client relationships. Your industry recognition comes from achievements I could never dream of attempting, yet I spent 5 years treating you like a charity case who somehow convinced my daughter to settle for mediocrity. The business community is calling you a visionary. Government officials describe your innovations as critical to national security. Academic institutions want to study your methods. Meanwhile, I was suggesting you consider more stable career options. I understand now why you stopped attending family gatherings. I would have made the same choice, faced with such sustained disrespect. What I don't understand is why you never told us what you were building, perhaps because you recognized that we weren't worthy of such confidence. If you're willing to accept it, I offer not just my apology but my genuine admiration for what you've achieved. You've built something remarkable while maintaining integrity that puts my own business practices to shame. With respect and regret. Richard Michael's letter revealed the deepest psychological impact of the revelation. David, I don't know how to reconcile the person I thought you were with the person you actually are. For 5 years, I patronized you about career advancement while you were advancing an entire industry. I offered advice about financial planning while you were making decisions involving hundreds of millions of dollars. The hardest part isn't admitting I was wrong. It's understanding how thoroughly wrong I was. This wasn't a simple misjudgment but a complete failure of perception. You were extraordinary, and I was too limited to see it. I keep thinking about the times I mentioned my bonuses, my promotions, my investment returns, all trivial achievements compared to what you were accomplishing in silence. The embarrassment is overwhelming, but it's also deserved. I don't know if you can ever see me as anything other than the arrogant brother-in-law who tried to make you feel small while you were building something magnificent. But I wanted you to know that I recognized my behavior was inexcusable and my judgment was worthless. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but it's all I have. Michael Amanda's letter was perhaps the most honest. David, as a lawyer, I'm trained to assess evidence and reach logical conclusions. My complete failure to recognize your brilliance represents such professional and personal incompetence that I question my judgment in every other area of my life. We treated you like you didn't belong in our family, while you were succeeding at levels none of us could imagine. We questioned your worthiness while you were building something that will outlast all our conventional achievements combined. The legal implications of your innovation are staggering. You've created new frameworks for digital privacy that courts will reference for decades. Yet I dismissed you as someone who lacked direction, and worried that you were limiting Sarah's potential. I spent 5 years giving my sister advice about her marriage to someone whose character and capabilities far exceeded my ability to comprehend them. The irony would be funny if it weren't so devastating. Please know that your absence from family gatherings has been noted and felt. The conversations are smaller without you. The achievements feel less significant when measured against yours, and the emptiness where you should be sitting reminds us constantly of our failure. I hope someday you might consider giving us another chance to know you properly. We don't deserve it, but Sarah does, and perhaps that's enough. Amanda, I set the letters aside and looked around the garage where everything had begun. These walls had witnessed the birth of ideas that were reshaping corporate cybersecurity worldwide. The humble space had produced innovations that governments considered essential to national defense. Yet for 5 years, The people who should have been my strongest supporters had seen only a man wasting time on computers. The apologies were sincere, clearly written, after considerable reflection and genuine remorse. But they also revealed something troubling. The family's newfound respect was entirely contingent on external validation. They respected me now because Forbes told them to, because industry experts confirmed my worth, because financial figures proved my value. What if I hadn't succeeded at such spectacular levels? What if TechShield had remained a modest regional business serving smaller clients? Would their attitude have changed, or would I still be the disappointing son-in-law who couldn't provide adequately for their daughter? The question bothered me more than the years of dismissal had. Success shouldn't be required to earn basic respect and inclusion. Character, kindness, and commitment to family should matter independent of professional achievement or financial status. Still, the letters represented something significant: acknowledgement of error, genuine remorse, and a request for the chance to build better relationships. Whether I was ready to accept that chance remained to be seen. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, couldn't be rebuilt with apologies alone. But for Sarah's sake, and perhaps for my own, I would have to consider whether forgiveness was possible when the people asking for it had revealed such fundamental limitations in their capacity to see worth in others. New Year's Eve found us all gathered in Sarah's childhood home for the first time since the Forbes revelation, a tentative reunion orchestrated with the careful diplomacy usually reserved for international peace negotiations. I'd agreed to attend with conditions that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, but which now seemed entirely reasonable given the circumstances. The family photo from that evening captured something unprecedented, me sitting in the center of the group rather than relegated to the edges, Sarah's hand in mine, and expressions on everyone's faces that suggested genuine effort rather than polite tolerance. For the first time in 5 years, I looked like I belonged. But the photo didn't capture the conversation that had made this gathering possible: a frank discussion about respect, boundaries, and the terms under which we could rebuild our relationships. I need to understand something, I'd told them during our preliminary meeting at a neutral restaurant. Your apologies focus on being wrong about my professional success, but what if TechShield had failed? What if I'd remained the modest IT worker you thought I was? Would I still be unworthy of inclusion in this family? The question had created an uncomfortable silence, broken finally by Richard's honest admission: I don't know. And that's probably the most damning thing I could say about my own character. The truth is, I continued, I didn't hide my success to surprise you or to prove a point. I hid it because I needed to know if you could accept me for who I was, rather than what I'd achieved. The answer was clearly no. Patricia had started to object, but I'd held up a hand. I'm not saying this to hurt anyone's feelings or to relitigate the past. I'm saying it because moving forward requires honest acknowledgement of what went wrong. You made acceptance conditional on success measured by your standards. That's not how families are supposed to work. The terms I'd outlined for a renewed relationship were non-negotiable. No more discussions about my career prospects or financial planning unless I initiated them. No more subtle suggestions about what Sarah deserved or comparisons to other family members' achievements. No more treating my interests and priorities as less valid than theirs simply because they came from a different background. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 5 years didn't happen, I'd explained. I'm asking you to understand that respect can't be retroactive. You can't undo years of dismissive treatment with newfound admiration based on magazine articles. Amanda had been the first to agree to these conditions, perhaps because her legal training helped her understand the concept of building new precedents from acknowledged failures. You're right, she'd said simply. We need to learn how to value people independent of their achievements. It's a character flaw that goes beyond just our treatment of you. The New Year's gathering operated under these new rules, and the difference was immediately apparent. Conversations included me naturally rather than awkwardly. Questions about my work came from genuine curiosity rather than skeptical evaluation. The family dynamics had shifted from barely tolerating my presence to actively engaging with my perspectives. But, perhaps more importantly, they began to understand who I actually was, rather than who they'd imagined me to be. They learned about my background growing up in a working-class family where college was an achievement, not an expectation. Heard about my motivation for starting TechShield, protecting people's digital privacy in an increasingly connected world. They discovered that my values hadn't changed with my success. I still believed in solving problems that mattered rather than simply maximizing profit. I turned down the acquisition offers because selling would have meant giving up control of the mission, I explained to Michael, who'd asked about the business decisions with genuine interest rather than condescending curiosity. The buyers wanted the technology, but they didn't share the vision of making cybersecurity accessible to organizations that couldn't afford traditional solutions. That's why you've been working with smaller nonprofits and educational institutions, Sarah added, clearly proud to finally share details about my work she'd observed, but couldn't discuss. The technology should serve everyone, not just Fortune 500 companies, I confirmed. We've developed scaled versions of our platform that protect community hospitals, local governments, and educational systems. Those clients don't generate much revenue, but they're often the most vulnerable to cyber threats. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That's not typically how business decisions are made in our circles. Profit maximization usually takes precedence over social impact. Maybe that's part of the problem with your circles, I said gently. The evening progressed with conversations that would have been impossible under the old family dynamics. We discussed technology policy, digital privacy rights, and the social responsibility of successful businesses. They asked questions that showed genuine interest in my perspectives rather than thinly veiled challenges to my competence. Patricia had prepared dinner with noticeable attention to my preferences that had never happened in 5 years of family gatherings. She'd researched my favorite wine, prepared dishes I'd mentioned enjoying, and arranged seating that placed me in the conversation rather than at its periphery. I've been reading about cybersecurity since Christmas, she admitted during dessert, trying to understand what you actually do rather than what I assumed you did. It's fascinating and terrifying simultaneously. Most people don't think about digital security until something goes wrong. I agreed. We're essentially protecting the invisible infrastructure that modern life depends on. Amanda leaned forward with interest. The legal implications are staggering. Privacy law is going to be completely transformed by technologies like yours. For the first time since I'd known her, Amanda was talking to me rather than around me, engaging with my expertise as something valuable rather than dismissible. The change was profound and, I had to admit, gratifying. As midnight approached, we gathered around the television to watch the countdown, and I realized something significant had shifted. The acceptance I felt wasn't contingent on my achievements or their approval. It was based on mutual respect for different perspectives and experiences. I was no longer the outsider trying to prove my worth to skeptical judges. I was a family member whose contributions were valued and whose presence was genuinely wanted. 1 year later, I stood on the TEDx stage at Stanford University, looking out at an audience of entrepreneurs, academics, and technology leaders who'd come to hear about building in the shadows, why success doesn't require recognition. The irony of giving a public speech about the value of privacy wasn't lost on me, but the message felt important enough to share. For 5 years, I told the audience, I built something extraordinary while the people closest to me remained convinced I was ordinary. That disconnect taught me something crucial about the nature of worth and the danger of external validation. The speech had grown out of conversations with Sarah about the lessons embedded in our experience. How do you measure success when the people whose opinions you value don't understand what you're building? How do you maintain confidence in your vision when everyone around you suggests you're wasting time? How do you know when to reveal what you've created and when to protect it from judgment? The garage became my sanctuary, not just because it was quiet, but because it was free from the expectations and limitations others placed on my potential. In that space, I could build according to my own vision rather than someone else's definition of success. The audience included several familiar faces: Rebecca Chen from my team, clients who'd become friends, and competitors who'd become collaborators on industry standards. But the faces that meant the most were in the front row. Sarah beaming with pride, and her family listening with attention that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. Richard had become something unexpected, a genuine friend and business advisor whose traditional banking perspective often complemented my technological approach. We'd started meeting monthly to discuss strategy, and his insights had helped me navigate complex negotiations with corporate clients who spoke his language better than mine. Patricia had surprised everyone by becoming TechShield's most effective advocate in philanthropic circles. Her connections in the nonprofit world had led to partnerships that brought cybersecurity protection to organizations that could never have afforded it otherwise. The work satisfied her desire to contribute meaningfully while utilizing skills she'd developed through years of charity leadership. Michael had proven most changed by the revelation. The discovery that his condescending advice had been offered to someone operating at levels far beyond his own experience had triggered genuine self-reflection. He'd become more humble in his professional interactions and more curious about perspectives that challenged his assumptions. Amanda had leveraged her legal expertise to help draft privacy legislation informed by real-world cybersecurity needs. We'd testified together before congressional committees, and her ability to translate technical concepts into legal frameworks had proven invaluable for policy development. But perhaps the most significant change had been in my relationship with Sarah. The end of secrecy had eliminated a barrier neither of us had fully understood existed. She could finally share in my professional excitement, understand my daily challenges, and contribute perspectives that improved both the business and the technology. The Forbes article changed everything. I continued in my speech, but not in the way you might expect. External recognition didn't validate what I'd built. The work validated itself through its impact. What changed was other people's ability to see value that had always been there. The TEDx talk represented more than personal catharsis. It was part of a broader effort to redefine how we think about success and recognition. TechShield had established a foundation focused on supporting entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds, people building remarkable things in garages, basements, and spare bedrooms, while being dismissed by those who couldn't see beyond conventional markers of achievement. We fund innovation that might never attract venture capital because it doesn't fit familiar patterns. I explained to the audience. Some of our most successful grants have gone to creators whose work was too visionary, too unconventional, or too focused on social impact to appeal to traditional investors. The foundation had become Sarah's primary focus outside of teaching. Her insights into education and child development had led to cybersecurity programs that taught digital literacy. In elementary schools, watching her present at conferences about protecting children's online privacy had given me the same pride I'd once hoped to inspire in her family. The question isn't whether your work will be recognized, I concluded my speech. The question is whether you'll let lack of recognition stop you from building things that matter. Value exists independent of validation, and impact transcends acknowledgement. The standing ovation felt gratifying. But what meant more were the conversations afterward, young entrepreneurs who felt encouraged to pursue unconventional paths, established professionals who reconsidered their own assumptions about worth and achievement, family members learning to support ventures they didn't fully understand. The garage had been transformed into a museum of sorts. Preserved exactly as it appeared during the early TechShield days, groups of Stanford business students toured it regularly, seeing firsthand where revolutionary technology had emerged from humble beginnings. The servers still hummed quietly, though they now ran simulations for the Foundation's educational programs rather than protecting corporate networks. Any regrets? Sarah asked as we drove home from the university, my speech notes scattered across the back seat. About keeping it secret for so long. About any of it. The secrecy, the family conflict, the years of building in isolation. I considered the question seriously. The pain had been real, the exclusion genuine, the cost of hiding significant achievements substantial. But the experience had also taught lessons that wouldn't have been learned through easier paths. No regrets, I said finally. Everything that happened led to where we are now. The work is more meaningful because it was driven by purpose rather than recognition. The family relationships are stronger because they're based on understanding rather than approval, and I know something valuable about my own character. I can build remarkable things even when nobody believes in them. Even when your wife's family thinks you're a disappointment, especially then. Sarah laughed, and the sound carried 5 years of vindication, growth, and genuine happiness. We'd all learned something important about the nature of worth, the danger of assumptions, and the possibility of change when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes and do better. The lights of our neighborhood came into view. Houses where ordinary people built extraordinary lives through work that mattered to them. Some were starting businesses in garages, others were writing novels in spare bedrooms, still others were developing innovations that would change their industries. Success was happening everywhere, often invisible to those who didn't know how to recognize it. That night, I updated my notes for the next TEDx appearance, scheduled for 6 months later. The title had evolved, Building in the Shadows. How Quiet Achievement Changes the World. The garage days were over, but the lessons they'd taught would inform everything I built going forward. Some victories are worth waiting for, especially when they transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. Recognition, when it finally comes, should be powerful enough to change hearts and minds permanently. That Christmas doorbell had done exactly that, proving that truth, when revealed at the right moment, can rewrite entire family histories. The empty chair at their table would never be empty again,